The night had settled over the small Colorado homestead like a velvet curtain, thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. The wind whispered through the tall grasses beyond the broken fence at the edge of the property, carrying the faint rustle of unseen animals. A young German shepherd puppy, barely 4 months old, slipped through the gap with reckless curiosity, his tiny paws pressing into the damp soil. His fur, black and tan, bristled slightly in the chill, and his floppy ears perked at every sound. He was chasing the high-pitched chirps of crickets and the distant, mournful calls of owls, oblivious to the danger that awaited beyond the familiar boundaries of his yard. The puppy's name was Max. He had always been full of energy, a little bundle of chaos who loved to dart through the yard at impossible speeds, tumbling over the garden hose, scaring the neighbor's cat, and chasing sticks with clumsy determination. Tonight, however, he was different. There was a strange thrill in the air, a scent that drew him toward the unknown. He bounded through the field with a reckless freedom, tongue lolling and tiny paws sinking into the soft dirt. Then the shadows began to move. At first, Max didn't notice them. He was too busy sniffing the ground and pouncing on a particularly bright firefly. But a flicker in the corner of his eye, subtle and slow, made him pause. Something was watching. He froze mid-pounce, his tiny chest heaving, ears straining. From the tall grass, yellow eyes emerged, one pair at first, then another, until a dozen glowed back at him like liquid amber. The eyes reflected the faint silver of the moon, sharp and unblinking, calculating his every move. The puppy's playful yips fell silent, replaced by a low, instinctive whine. He backed away, but the tall grass seemed to close around him, thickening like a living wall. Growls rumbled from the shadows, soft at first, then louder, sharper, unmistakably aggressive. Max's tail tucked tightly between his legs. He had heard dogs growl before, but these weren't dogs. The scent in the air, musky, wild, and raw, was unlike anything he had known. His instinct screamed at him to run, but the broken fence behind him and the fallen logs in front created a cage he couldn't escape. One coyote stepped into the moonlight. Its fur was mottled gray, eyes glittering with a predatory intelligence that chilled Max's small heart. Its head cocked slightly as it studied him, tail low but stiff. Then another emerged, then another, until the circle was complete. Max realized he was surrounded. His yips turned to frantic barking, small but desperate, echoing in the night. He tried to retreat, but the uneven ground slowed him. His tiny legs, perfect for playing and tumbling, struggled against the uneven field. The coyotes advanced slowly, deliberately, circling closer, testing his resolve. One of them snapped its jaws in a warning, a sharp click that made Max's fur stand on end. He whimpered and tried to dart to the left, only to find another coyote blocking his path. Panic surged through him like a wave, and he pressed himself against a fallen log, trembling. Somewhere in the distance, far above the field and the line of trees, a faint voice called out. It was the familiar, worried tone of his owner, a man who had spent countless hours training Max, playing with him and laughing at his puppy antics. "Max! Max, come here!" The voice was muffled, carried on the wind, barely reaching him, but it ignited a flicker of hope. Max barked back, a sharp, urgent sound trying to let his owner know where he was, but the coyotes only tilted their heads, unbothered, their yellow eyes fixed on him like deadly lanterns. Max's heart pounded so fast it felt like it would burst through his chest. He had never faced danger like this. His little body shook as he remembered the lessons from his puppy classes, the commands, the bonding, the trust he had learned. But now, alone, surrounded and outnumbered, those lessons felt meaningless. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to flee, to survive. Then he heard it, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to shake the very air around him. The coyote stiffened, ears twitching. Max turned, and his ears flattened against his head in disbelief. From the shadowed edge of the field, moving like a wraith, came the figure of a full-grown German shepherd. Muscles rippling under a sleek coat, scars visible along his flank, eyes burning with a dangerous light. The dog stepped forward with a calm authority that made the smaller puppy's heart leap. The older shepherd's presence shifted the dynamics immediately. He didn't bark or growl indiscriminately. He measured, he strategized. One slow, deliberate step at a time, he positioned himself between Max and the encircling predators. His eyes locked with the alpha coyote, and for a moment the field seemed to hold its breath. The coyotes hesitated, unsure. This wasn't just a young, inexperienced pup. They recognized a threat. They had hunted before, they had faced weaker adversaries, but this older dog carried an air of confidence and lethal intent that made even the bravest of the pack pause. Max's eyes widened. He wanted to run, to follow this guardian, but his legs trembled under him. The older dog turned his head slightly, a silent command for Max to stay behind him, to trust, to watch. It was the first time in Max's young life that he understood fear and courage could coexist, that there could be someone stronger, someone who would fight for him when he could not fight for himself. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the approaching coyotes closer, sharper. Max crouched low, small paws sinking into the dirt, ears flat, eyes wide. The night had become an arena, a stage where life and death danced in tense silence. And above it all, the moon cast a silver glow over the scene, highlighting every tense muscle, every wary eye, every tiny heartbeat that thudded like a drum in the night. Then the alpha coyote growled again, louder this time, a challenge. The older shepherd responded with a low, throaty rumble, a sound that vibrated through the grass and into Max's chest. The coyotes froze, assessing, calculating, unsure if they should attack or retreat. Max pressed closer to the older dog, feeling the warmth and strength that radiated from him. Somewhere far away, faint but growing louder, the sound of a human voice calling his name, the voice of someone who cared, someone desperate to find him, echoed through the darkness. But would it reach him in time? The coyotes were circling tighter now, eyes glinting in the moonlight, muscles coiled like springs ready to strike. Max's little body trembled with a mix of fear and anticipation. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he would survive this night. But he knew one thing: he wasn't alone. And just as the coyotes lunged forward, teeth bared and fur bristling, a deep, commanding bark erupted from the older shepherd, splitting the night like a thunderclap. The battle lines were drawn. Max's fate and the outcome of this encounter hung in the balance. The night air vibrated with the echo of the deep, commanding bark, and for a moment the field seemed frozen in suspense. The older German shepherd, his fur glistening under the silver moonlight, planted himself firmly between Max and the coyotes. His scars, visible along his shoulders and flanks, were not just reminders of past battles. They were warnings. Every muscle in his body tensed like coiled steel, eyes locked on the alpha of the coyote pack. The coyotes paused, circling slowly, growls low and dangerous. Their movements were precise, predatory, a coordinated unit that had hunted together for years. They had the advantage of numbers, speed, and experience. But the shepherd's presence disrupted their rhythm. He wasn't afraid. He didn't flinch. And in that confidence there was a terrifying promise. Anyone who dared step closer would pay a price. Max pressed himself against the ground behind the older dog, trembling, ears flat, watching with wide, fearful eyes. His tiny heart raced so fast it felt as though it might explode. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee into the dark forest at the edge of the field, but the sight of the older shepherd, so calm, so fearless, anchored him. Max knew deep down that he had a protector. A coyote, smaller but quick and cunning, lunged forward suddenly, testing the shepherd's reaction. The older dog snapped in response, teeth flashing in the dim light, and the coyote recoiled, startled but unhurt. It circled back, joining the others in the slow, methodical tightening of the pack. The circle shrank, inches at a time, eyes glinting in the moonlight like shards of molten gold. Max whimpered, shifting his weight nervously. The wind carried the scent of danger so sharply it made his nose quiver. He had never felt so exposed, so small, so utterly powerless. The night that had seemed magical and free just an hour ago now felt like a trap, an arena where life and death could pivot on a single move. And he was right in the center of it. The older shepherd growled low, a rumble that rolled through the grass and into Max's paws. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise of retribution for anyone who dared close in. The alpha coyote, a tall, lean predator with eyes as sharp as daggers, stopped in its tracks. It sniffed the air, calculating, analyzing, trying to decide whether this was worth the risk. The pack shifted uneasily. Instinctively, they knew this wasn't a normal prey. Max's ears twitched. He could hear every subtle sound, the snap of a twig underfoot, the rustle of grass, the deep breathing of his protector, and the measured growls of the coyotes. He wished desperately for the comfort of home, for the soft bed, for the familiar voice of his owner calling his name. But there was no safety here, only tension, only anticipation, only the raw, unfiltered pulse of the wild. A sudden movement caught Max's eye, a shadow slipping silently through the grass behind the pack. One of the younger coyotes tried to flank them, hopping to catch the shepherd off guard. The older dog's head snapped toward the movement with lightning reflexes. In a blur, he shifted, blocking the path, his growl reverberating through the field. The flanking coyote froze, reconsidering its boldness. Max took a hesitant step forward, instinctively following the older dog's lead. He wanted to help, to be brave, but his legs shook so badly he nearly collapsed. The older shepherd nudged him gently with his nose, a silent command to stay close, to trust, to survive. Max pressed against him, feeling a strange mix of fear, awe, and gratitude. The coyotes were getting bolder. The alpha circled to the right, testing the older dog's focus. Another growl escaped the shepherd's throat, sharper this time, warning them to think twice. The moonlight caught the glint of blood on his paws, scars from previous fights, a testament to his experience, a reminder that he had survived countless dangerous encounters. And tonight, he would do it again. Suddenly, a sharp yelp shattered the night. Max froze. One of the coyotes had tried a daring leap, aiming for the puppy. But before it could reach him, the older shepherd intercepted with a powerful swipe of his paw. The coyote tumbled to the side, dazed but not defeated. The pack paused, reassessing, calculating whether to retreat or press on. Max's little body shook violently, not from cold but from adrenaline. He realized that this wasn't just about survival, it was about trust. He had to trust the older shepherd. He had no choice. The wind carried distant sounds now, the faint hum of a highway, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of trees in the breeze, but none of it could distract from the immediate danger surrounding him. The alpha coyote crouched low, muscles coiled like springs, ready to strike. The pack mirrored him, forming a tense, ready-to-pounce formation. It was a test, a challenge, a negotiation written in teeth, eyes, and body language. The older shepherd stood his ground, unflinching, unmoving. Every inch of his body screamed dominance, experience, and lethal intent. Then from somewhere beyond the trees, a faint human voice cut through the tension. "Max! Max!" It called high and frantic, filled with desperation. The puppy's ears twitched. Could that be? He barked, a sharp, urgent sound trying to signal back, to bridge the impossible distance between the wild field and the safety of home. The coyotes paused again, distracted by the sound, their focus breaking momentarily. The older shepherd's eyes flicked toward the voice, calculating, but he didn't move from his defensive position. Max pressed closer, nuzzling against him, feeling a strange surge of courage. The pack's movement slowed, uncertainty creeping into their precise coordination. Then the alpha coyote made a subtle shift, testing the shepherd's resolve once more. The older dog growled, a deep, resonant rumble that carried across the field. The coyotes flinched. They had underestimated him. This wasn't a battle they could win easily. And for the first time, Max realized that the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about respect, about courage, about facing impossible odds and refusing to break. Max's heart raced, paws trembling, eyes wide with fear and awe. The older shepherd had become more than a protector. He was a symbol, a force of nature, a guardian who refused to yield. The coyotes, uncertain and wary, slowly began to circle less aggressively, testing the limits of this newfound dominance. And just as Max began to think that maybe, just maybe, they might get through the night alive, a sudden movement in the darkness startled him. A rustle, a shadow slipping closer, faster than any coyote had moved before. Max yelped. The older shepherd's growl deepened and his body tensed, ready for the unknown threat closing in. The night, thick with danger and suspense, had only just begun. The rustling shadow that had startled Max dissolved into the moonlight, revealing a figure moving with incredible precision. A full-grown German shepherd, his coat a mixture of steel gray and black, muscles rippling under scars earned from years of battles unknown to the young puppy. He didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He simply stepped forward, a silent promise of protection that even the alpha coyote could not ignore. Max froze, trembling, his tiny paws pressed into the damp earth, ears flattened, eyes wide with disbelief. Was this real? The older dog's amber eyes met Max's, and in that brief moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. "I've got you," the older shepherd seemed to say. Max pressed close, instinctively seeking the warmth and strength of this sudden savior. The coyotes reacted immediately. Their coordinated pack mentality shifted from curiosity to aggression. One darted forward, testing the new dog, only to be met with a lightning-fast strike. The older shepherd's jaws snapped shut mere inches from the coyote's snout, teeth flashing under the pale moonlight. Another tried to circle around, but a swift pivot and a growl that rumbled like distant thunder forced it to retreat. The pack hesitated, uncertain, cautious, unnerved. Max couldn't believe his eyes. The older dog moved with a precision, confidence, and experience that Max had only seen glimpses of in training videos, in the stories told by his owner. Every step, every glance, every growl was calculated, deliberate. The coyotes, creatures of the wild who had terrorized countless smaller animals, were faltering. And yet the pack wasn't defeated. They were predators, cunning and patient. They began to regroup, flanking him in a slow, deadly rotation, circling like a predator waiting for a moment of weakness. The field seemed to pulse with tension. The wind rustled the tall grass, carrying the sharp sense of predator and prey alike. Max pressed closer to the older dog, feeling the steadying heartbeat beneath the muscular chest, the warmth of fur that radiated courage. He wanted to act to help, but his legs quivered uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed survival, but survival meant trust. Trust in this guardian, trust in someone stronger. Suddenly, a low, threatening growl erupted from the alpha coyote. It stepped forward, its eyes locking on the older shepherd. There was a silent challenge in that gaze, a test of dominance that would determine who ruled this night. The older dog didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered his body, teeth bared, muscles coiled like springs. He was ready. He had faced danger before, and he had survived. The coyotes would learn that tonight. The rules were different. One coyote, braver than the rest, lunged toward Max, teeth snapping. Instinctively, the older shepherd moved between them in a blur of motion, intercepting the predator mid-leap. The two collided with a force that sent dust and grass flying into the moonlit air. Max's ears rang from the impact. His heart hammered in his chest. He barked desperately, more in shock than bravery, but the sight before him left him both terrified and awed. The older shepherd twisted expertly, jaws clamping onto the coyote's flank, throwing it off balance. The coyote yelped and rolled away, unharmed but humiliated. The other members of the pack paused, unsure whether to continue the assault. The dominance, the sheer will of this older dog radiated through the field. It was more than strength. It was experience, courage, and an unspoken promise of protection for the small puppy pressed close behind him. Max's fur was damp with sweat and dew, his little body trembling as adrenaline surged through him. He watched the older dog move like a shadow, fast, precise, unyielding. Every coyote that dared approach met the same resistance. The pack began to circle again, slower this time, more cautious. They had underestimated their opponent, and the night had just begun. Then from the shadows beyond the circle of predators, Max heard a faint, frantic human voice. "Max, Max!" It was high-pitched and full of panic, carried on the cold night wind. Max's ears twitched. Could it be his owner? Hope surged within him, mingling with fear. He barked sharply, a sound meant to signal back, to let someone know where he was. The coyotes flinched at the noise, distracted, their focus momentarily broken. The older shepherd's eyes flicked toward the sound but did not leave the circle of danger surrounding Max. He shifted slightly, creating a narrow path for the puppy without breaking the defensive line he had drawn. Max instinctively followed, his small paws stepping carefully, each movement fueled by trust and adrenaline. Suddenly, one of the younger coyotes made a daring move, darting in from the side to flank the pair. The older shepherd reacted in an instant, pivoting, his teeth snapping dangerously close to the predator's flank. The coyote yelped in surprise and retreat, its confidence shaken. Max pressed against the older dog's side, eyes wide, ears flattened, heart hammering. He had never felt such fear and exhilaration in his short life. The alpha coyote snarled, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the field. It crouched low, muscles coiled like springs, ready to launch another attack. The other members of the pack mirrored him, their coordinated movement a deadly ballet. But the older shepherd remained steadfast. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Every sinew, every muscle, every instinct screamed one thing: I will not fail. Max's breath came in short, sharp pants. He pressed closer, trembling, trying to mimic the older dog's stillness, trying to become invisible. But the tension in the field was palpable. Every shadow, every rustle of grass, every flicker of movement carried potential danger. The older shepherd's gaze never wavered, assessing, predicting, anticipating. And Max began to understand, this wasn't just brute strength. This was intelligence, experience, and unwavering courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Then the pack made their move, surging forward in a sudden rush, teeth bared and eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The older shepherd met them head-on, growls echoing across the field. Fur flew, dust rose, and the clash erupted like a storm. Max yelped, jumping instinctively, watching the skilled, calculated defense unfold before him. Each coyote that dared approach was met with swift, precise counterattacks. The older dog's experience was evident. Every move was measured, every strike calculated, every maneuver designed to protect the vulnerable puppy behind him. Max felt a surge of hope amid the terror. He wasn't alone. Someone strong, fearless, and unyielding had chosen to stand with him, to protect him from a danger he was too small to face alone. And yet, the pack was relentless. They regrouped quickly, circling again, eyes locked on the older shepherd. The night air hummed with tension, the faint rustle of the grass punctuated by low growls and snapping jaws. Max's body trembled, a mix of fear, awe, and growing determination. He pressed close, trusting the older dog entirely, feeling the unspoken message: survive, stay close, and wait. The coyotes were intelligent, adaptive predators, but they had never faced such determination. And in the moonlit field, under the watchful eyes of the older shepherd, Max began to feel a spark of courage he had never known before. And just as he took a cautious step forward, trying to mirror the guardian at his side, a sudden, sharp movement from the tree line caught his attention, a shadow darting closer, faster than any coyote had moved before. Max froze, ears flat, heart hammering, as the older shepherd's growl deepened, muscles coiling for the next confrontation. The night was far from over, and the real test had only just begun. The moon hung low over the field, silver light spilling across the tall grass, casting long shadows that danced like specters around the clearing. Max pressed his small, trembling body against the older shepherd, his tiny paws sinking into the soft, damp earth. The field had become a stage, and on it, a deadly ballet was about to unfold, fur, teeth, and raw instinct ready to collide in a struggle for survival. The coyotes surged forward all at once, a coordinated, terrifying wave of muscle and teeth. Their eyes gleamed like molten gold, their fangs bared in lethal precision. The older shepherd braced himself, paws digging into the soil, ears flat, teeth flashing under the moonlight. His growl was low and threatening, a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, warning the pack that he was not an opponent to be underestimated. Max's heart pounded violently. He could hear the panting, the growls, the sharp snick of teeth snapping through the air. One of the younger coyotes lunged directly at Max, hopping to snatch the puppy while the older shepherd was distracted. But the guardian reacted instantly, spinning with astonishing speed. His powerful jaws clamped around the coyote's side, forcing it to yelp and retreat. Max pressed closer, flattened to the ground, trembling with fear and awe. The alpha coyote, larger and more cunning than the rest, darted in from the left flank. The older shepherd anticipated the attack before it happened, pivoting smoothly and meeting the predator with a fierce strike. Fur flew, dust clouded the air, and the clash of predator against predator erupted like a storm under the silver moonlight. Every movement of the older shepherd was precise, every counterattack calculated. He had survived countless battles before, but tonight the stakes were higher than ever. The safety of the vulnerable puppy rested entirely on his shoulders. One coyote lunged at him from the rear, teeth snapping dangerously close. The older shepherd twisted midair, using the coyote's momentum against it, sending it sprawling into the grass. Another coyote tried a daring leap at Max. The puppy yelped and froze, paralyzed with fear, but the guardian was quicker. He intercepted the attacker mid-leap, jaws clamping firmly but carefully on its flank, forcing it to tumble away without serious injury. The night air was thick with tension, fur, and the metallic scent of blood. Max's ears rang, his heart thumped wildly, but he pressed closer, seeking safety in the steady presence of his protector. He had never known fear like this before, fear so sharp, so immediate, yet mixed with a strange surge of hope. He realized then that courage was contagious. In the older shepherd's unwavering stance, Max felt a flicker of bravery ignite within him. The coyotes paused momentarily, regrouping, circling again with a predator's patience. They had underestimated the older dog. They were smart, cunning, relentless. But this guardian was something they had never faced before: experience, intelligence, and a will to protect that was unyielding. The alpha coyote's eyes glinted with calculated aggression. It made a sudden move, lunging toward the older shepherd with a speed that was almost supernatural in the dim moonlight. The older dog met the strike head-on. Their bodies collided, a whirlwind of fur and teeth, growls and snapping jaws echoing across the field. Max could only watch, tiny and helpless, as the guardian twisted, struck, and countered with breathtaking precision. Dust rose in clouds, leaves fluttered like confetti in the chaos, and the distant rustle of the forest seemed to hold its breath in awe of the spectacle. A coyote lunged at Max again, this time from the side. Instinctively, the older shepherd twisted his body, placing himself directly between the puppy and the predator. The coyote snapped, caught off guard, and was sent tumbling into the tall grass. Max's tiny legs shook violently. He had never seen such bravery, such skill, and such raw determination. The older dog's eyes met his briefly, and in that gaze was a message clear as day: stay close, survive, trust me. The moonlight highlighted every detail of the battle: the muscles rippling, the claws digging into the soil, the flash of teeth, the sweat and dew-soaked fur. The older shepherd fought not just for survival, but for something far greater. The life of this small, terrified puppy pressed against him. Every strike he delivered was measured, every dodge precise. The coyotes, despite their numbers and cunning, began to falter under the relentless, calculated assault. Max whimpered, shaking from fear and exhilaration. The adrenaline coursing through his tiny body made his paws ache, but he stayed close, pressed against the warmth and strength of his protector. He could hear the coyotes' frustrated growls, their circling slow and hesitant now. They realized this wasn't going to be an easy prey. This was a force of nature, a guardian who refused to yield. Then, in a sudden, terrifying moment, a coyote bit down on the older shepherd's leg. The shepherd yelped sharply, twisting violently to shake the predator free. Blood began to darken his fur, seeping through the silver sheen of moonlight. Max gasped, ears flat, heart in his throat. The older dog faltered for a brief instant, but only a brief instant. With a roar of pure fury, he shook free, jaws snapping at the closest attacker, sending it sprawling. The alpha coyote let out a frustrated, guttural snarl. The pack hesitated, glancing at one another as if questioning their instincts. They had come for an easy kill, but instead found themselves facing a storm, a force that defied their expectations. The older shepherd stood tall, body coiled like a spring, ready for the next move. Max pressed even closer, tiny body trembling, as he realized the fight wasn't over yet. The wind shifted, carrying a distant human voice. Max's ears twitched. Could it be his owner? He barked, a sharp, urgent sound trying to signal back. The coyotes flinched, distracted, but the older shepherd didn't let his guard down. He shifted slightly, allowing Max a narrow path behind him, a corridor of safety in the chaos of the battle. Then from the far edge of the field, another movement, a shadow darting faster than any coyote, slipping through the trees toward the clearing. Max froze, heart hammering as the older shepherd's growl deepened, every muscle coiling in anticipation of a new threat. The night, already a storm of fur, teeth, and tension, had taken an unpredictable turn. Max pressed against the older dog, trembling but no longer paralyzed by fear. In the heat of the battle, he felt something he had never felt before: awe, respect, and a spark of courage. He understood that survival wasn't just about running or hiding. It was about trust, timing, and standing firm when the world seemed determined to overwhelm you. The coyotes regrouped one last time, eyes flashing, teeth bared, ready to surge. The older shepherd's growl rolled through the field like a thunderclap, a warning, a promise, a line in the sand. Max's tiny body pressed closer, ears flat, eyes wide, heart racing with a mix of terror and hope. And then, just as the pack prepared to strike once more, a new sound pierced the night, a human shout, frantic and desperate, carried by the wind. Max's ears shot up. Could help finally be near? The coyotes froze, uncertainty flickering in their golden eyes. The older shepherd's gaze flicked toward the voice, calculating, as he prepared for the inevitable final confrontation. The night held its breath. Every muscle, every instinct, every heartbeat in the field waited for the next move. Max, trembling and small, realized that the fight for survival had only just begun, and the outcome would change everything. The frantic shouts cut through the night like lightning. "Max! Max!" The voice belonged to the puppy's owner, a man who had been searching tirelessly, flashlight in hand, his heart hammering with every step. The uneven terrain slowed his progress, but he ran without thought, driven by fear and desperation. He didn't see the shadows circling ahead, only the pale glow of the moon illuminating the field, and the subtle rustle of movement that made his pulse spike. Max's ears shot up at the familiar voice. He barked wildly, the sound sharp and urgent, carrying across the field. His tiny paws dug into the dirt as he pressed closer to the older shepherd, whose eyes flicked toward the new sound but never left the encroaching pack. For a fleeting moment, hope surged inside him. Perhaps help had finally arrived. The coyotes paused, startled by the new human presence. Their low growls turned into questioning snarls, their coordinated circling disrupted. The alpha coyote's ears twitched. It had not anticipated interference from this unknown creature. The pack shifted uneasily, eyeing the approaching man with suspicion, but instinct, hunger, and territoriality still held sway. They were predators, cautious, patient, and deadly. The older shepherd let out a deep, warning growl, positioning himself between Max and the closest coyote, a low snarl vibrating through the night. Max pressed close, trembling, his tiny body pressed against the guardian who had become his shield. Every flick of muscle, every flash of teeth, was a lesson in courage for the young puppy. Max realized that trust had become a lifeline, not a choice. The man stumbled over a root, cursing under his breath, flashlight bouncing in his grip. The beam of light cut across the tall grass, sweeping over the older shepherd, Max, and the tense circle of coyotes. The creatures froze, startled by the sudden intrusion of light and sound. For a heartbeat, the field was still, silence hanging thick like fog. Then, almost as if recognizing an opportunity, the alpha coyote let out a low snarl and lunged toward the older shepherd again. Time seemed to slow. The older dog twisted, meeting the coyote midair with a precision that was terrifying to witness. Fur flew, claws dug into the ground, and the two collided in a whirlwind of motion. Max pressed low, ears flat, heart pounding like a drum. He had never been closer to danger, never felt adrenaline surge through him so violently. The man shouted, waving his arms, "Get back! Go away!" His voice trembled with fear, desperation lending it power. The coyotes hesitated, thrown off by the strange intrusion. None had encountered humans in the field before, at least not like this. The alpha circled, reconsidering the odds, while the younger members of the pack glanced nervously at one another. Max's tiny paws dug into the dirt. He could feel the older shepherd tense beside him, muscles coiled, ready for anything. He watched as the dog twisted again, intercepting a daring flank attempt by one of the younger coyotes. The battle was relentless, a storm of teeth, claws, and instinct under the cold glow of the moon. Each strike from the older shepherd was precise, controlled, devastatingly effective. The man reached the edge of the clearing, panting, heartbeat racing. His eyes widened at the scene before him. Two German shepherds, one tiny and trembling, the other full-grown and ferocious, stood their ground against a pack of coyotes. Dust and grass swirled around them like a whirlwind, and the smell of sweat, fur, and wild animals filled the night air. For a moment he froze, overwhelmed by fear and awe. He dropped to his knees, flashlight still in hand, trying to make himself less threatening, more human, more a part of the pack's equation of survival. "Max, buddy, it's okay, I've got you," he called, voice breaking. Max barked again, this time louder, more urgent, and the older shepherd's eyes flicked toward him. He shifted slightly, placing himself squarely between the puppy and the coyotes, a living barrier. The alpha coyote hesitated, glancing between the man and the dogs, calculating risk and reward. It had been relentless before, but now a new variable had entered the field. The humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and powerful in ways the pack could not fully comprehend. The tension stretched taut across the field, every movement a question, every breath a gamble. The older shepherd let out a sharp, commanding bark, a sound that seemed to slice through the night. The coyotes paused again, uncertain, measuring their odds. The man seized the moment. He crept forward, hands outstretched, eyes locked on Max. His heart thumped in his chest, a mixture of fear, hope, and awe at the scene unfolding before him. Max pressed close to the older shepherd, tiny paws trembling, but he felt the growing reassurance of the human presence. Someone had heard him, someone had come. Perhaps he might finally escape the terror of the night. The older shepherd remained vigilant, growling low, every sinew coiled for instant reaction. Then, almost as if spurred by desperation, one of the younger coyotes lunged at Max, teeth snapping just inches away. The older dog reacted instantly, twisting and striking with precision that was almost inhuman. The coyote yelped and retreated, limping slightly, while the alpha reassessed, growling low and warning the others. The man finally reached Max, dropping to his knees and scooping the trembling puppy into his arms. Max yipped in relief, pressing against the warmth of his owner, but the older shepherd remained, still standing between the human and the predators. Blood streaked his fur, claws dug into the earth, eyes blazing with the fire of defiance. The alpha coyote let out a final, frustrated snarl and retreated slightly, followed cautiously by the others. They weren't done, they hadn't given up, but for now the balance had shifted. The older shepherd had held them off, his presence a barrier that none of the pack dared breach completely. Max's owner whispered urgently, "Hold on, buddy. Hold on, I've got you." The man carefully laid Max down behind him, leaving space for the older shepherd to remain on guard. The coyotes watched from the edge of the field, muscles coiled, calculating whether to retreat or strike again. The night was far from over, but for a brief, heart-stopping moment, survival seemed possible. Max pressed against his owner, trembling, ears flat, eyes wide with fear and relief. He had witnessed courage, precision, and sacrifice beyond his comprehension. The older shepherd, scarred and bloodied, remained tense and alert, a silent sentinel standing between the pack and the tiny life he had sworn to protect. The wind rustled through the tall grass again, carrying the scent of predator and prey, human and animal alike. The field seemed alive with tension, every shadow a potential threat, every rustle a warning. The coyotes lingered at the periphery, testing boundaries, while the man and his two dogs held their ground. And just as the man began to reach for his phone to call for further help, a sudden, sharp movement caught Max's attention, a shadow flicking faster than the eye could follow, darting through the edge of the trees. The older shepherd stiffened, hackles raised, muscles coiled. The coyotes tensed again, and Max realized with a jolt that the danger was far from over. The night had shifted, but the battle for survival was still raging. Max's trembling paws pressed against the soil as he pressed closer to his guardian. The older shepherd's growl deepened, echoing through the field, a warning and a promise. "I will not let you fall." And as the wind carried the distant human voice further into the night, Max understood that survival would require every ounce of courage, trust, and instinct he had left, and that the story of this night was far from over. The headlights of the pickup truck cut through the darkness as the man sped down the uneven dirt road toward home, Max cradled tightly in his arms, trembling. The older shepherd was lying in the back of the truck bed, battered, blood streaking his black and gray fur, every breath coming in shallow, labored pants. Max's small whines mixed with the older dog's deep, rasping breaths, the sounds of survival clashing with fear. Every bump in the dirt road jolted the older shepherd painfully, but he refused to lie down fully, keeping his body positioned between Max and the outside world. His amber eyes, sharp and alert despite exhaustion, tracked every shadow along the roadside, every movement in the trees. He was still on guard, a sentinel even in weakness, unwilling to relinquish his protective duty. Max pressed close, tiny body shaking, ears flat against his head. He had never felt so vulnerable, yet so safe. The older shepherd's presence radiated something deeper than strength, experience, courage, and an unspoken understanding of responsibility. Max could sense it, instinctively recognizing that this was no ordinary dog. The man's hands shook as he pulled into the driveway, slamming the truck into park. He jumped out, flashlight in one hand, Max cradled in the other, and hurried to the garage, dragging the older shepherd behind him. The dog grunted and tried to rise, but the man gently pushed him down. "Easy, you've done enough," he whispered, worry etched into every line of his face. Blood had soaked the towels the man pressed against the older dog's wounds, and the smell of iron mixed with wet earth filled the air. Max yipped, pressing closer to the older dog as if sensing the gravity of the situation. The man gently lifted the puppy and set him down on the floor, letting him nuzzle against the older shepherd's side. The older dog shifted slightly, leaning into Max, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The battle was over for now, but the cost was clear. His body bore the scars of the fight, some old, some fresh, some deep enough to worry even a seasoned human observer. As the man cleaned and wrapped the older shepherd's wounds, his flashlight flicked across a faint, almost faded marking inside the dog's ear. His breath caught. It was a tattoo, a small, precise symbol of a K9 unit, a marking he hadn't noticed before. He froze, eyes wide, heart hammering. Could it be? This dog, battered and wild, had once been trained, disciplined, and deployed in law enforcement. Max's tiny head tilted, ears twitching, as though he sensed the significance of the discovery. The older shepherd's eyes, usually so fierce, seemed to soften slightly as the man gently traced the tattoo. Memories flooded back, the stories of the retired K9 who had disappeared years ago during a training exercise, presumed lost in a storm and never seen again. And here he was, scarred, wild, yet still a protector. The man whispered almost to himself, You're the one they said was gone. You survived all this time." The older shepherd's eyes met his, amber and unwavering, and a soft, guttural sound rumbled in his throat. It was neither a bark nor a growl, but something in between, a recognition, a connection, a silent agreement. Max pressed closer, tiny paws resting on the older dog's side, his small head brushing against fur that smelled of earth, blood, and survival. The puppy's eyes were wide, filled with awe and gratitude, as if he understood that he had been saved by something extraordinary, something beyond the normal bounds of life. The man shook his head, trying to comprehend the scene before him. This dog, once trained to protect and serve, had not only survived years in the wild but had stepped into the role of guardian again, defending a helpless puppy against a pack of relentless predators. His mind raced, considering the improbabilities, the survival, the timing, the courage, and the almost supernatural instinct that had guided the dog through the night. The older shepherd, still trembling, let out a deep, slow breath. Blood seeped through the bandages, but his stance remained proud, vigilant, protective. He had lived wild for years, hunted by survival itself, and yet here he was, choosing to protect rather than flee. Max pressed closer, tiny body shivering with awe and relief. It was a bond forged in terror and adrenaline, one that words could not describe. As the man sat beside them, gently stroking the older shepherd's head, he realized something profound. This dog had chosen to protect, to fight, to risk life and limb for a creature smaller and weaker than himself. Max had been his responsibility now, and yet it was not duty alone that guided the dog. It was instinct, courage, and perhaps a spark of something deeply human, empathy. The house was quiet except for the rustling of the wind through the trees and the occasional low growl or whine from the older shepherd. Max's tiny paws fidgeted as he pressed against the dog, never letting go. The man continued to examine the wounds, whispering reassurances, planning a vet visit for the night. He could not shake the thought that this dog, a former K9, had not only survived years alone, but had performed feats of protection that defied reason and expectation. A sudden noise outside made all three freeze, a twig snapping, distant yet sharp. The older shepherd's eyes snapped toward the sound, muscles coiled, ears pricked, still in full alert mode. Max whimpered, pressing closer, trusting entirely in his savior's instincts. The man froze as well, realizing that even here in the safety of home, danger still lingered nearby. The revelation settled in the man's mind, a weight of awe and disbelief. This wasn't just a heroic dog, it was a legend returned to life. The older shepherd had fought alone in the wilderness, survived countless dangers, and now had saved Max, proving that courage and loyalty could endure even the harshest trials. Hours later, as the wound dressing was finished and the older shepherd lay exhausted, Max finally curled next to him, warm and safe for the first time in the night. The man sat back, watching the two, heart heavy with gratitude and disbelief. He could not have predicted the events that had unfolded, the escape through the broken fence, the pack of coyotes, the intervention of a dog thought lost to time, but the truth was undeniable. The older shepherd had chosen protection over self-preservation, embodying a courage that few humans, let alone animals, could claim. In the quiet of the house, Max's small whine softened into tentative snores. The older shepherd, bloodied, scarred, yet unbroken, remained vigilant, eyes half closed but always aware. And the man, sitting in the shadows of his own awe, realized that this night had changed everything. Bonds had been forged, lives had been saved, and a legend thought lost had returned to write a new chapter in the story of survival, loyalty, and courage. And somewhere outside the house, the distant howl of a coyote echoed, a reminder that danger still lurked, that the wilderness had not forgotten, and that the night's trials were far from over. The man glanced at the older shepherd and Max, chest swelling with respect and gratitude, knowing that he had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would forever be etched into his memory, a tale of courage that no words could truly capture. The night held its breath, the battle won but the story continuing, and the man understood one undeniable truth. Some heroes, even if they've been lost to the wild for years, never forget their duty. The ambulance siren wailed in the distance as the man raced through the winding roads toward the emergency veterinary clinic. Max clutched in his arms, his tiny body trembling from adrenaline and fear. In the back seat, the older shepherd lay on a makeshift stretcher, blood-streaked fur matted with dirt, sweat, and the scars of the night's battle. His amber eyes, though sharp and vigilant, held a glimmer of exhaustion that made the man's chest tighten. Every bump in the road sent jolts through the older dog's body. He grunted, half growled, half panted, but refused to lie down fully. Max, nestled close to him, let out small whimpers, tiny paws pressing against his guardian. Despite the pain and fatigue, the shepherd's instincts were still razor-sharp. He tracked every shadow in the road beyond the windshield, every flicker of movement, every faint noise, ready to spring into action even now. The man's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. He glanced at Max, whose wide eyes reflected the dashboard lights, ears flat against his tiny head. "Almost there, buddy. Hang in there," he whispered, voice trembling. He stole a quick glance at the older shepherd. "You're going to make it too, I promise. You've done enough for one night." At the emergency clinic, lights flared as the man rushed through the doors, staff immediately springing into action. "We've got a German shepherd, critical injuries, and a puppy. Both need immediate attention." His voice carried urgency that cut through the sterile white corridors. Nurses and vets moved like a well-rehearsed team, wheeling in gurneys and gathering medical tools with practiced precision. Max squirmed in the man's arms, whining softly, tiny body pressed against him. The older shepherd was lifted onto a stretcher, and the man followed closely, his eyes never leaving the dog's face. Every step felt surreal. Just hours ago, the two dogs had faced death in the moonlit field, surrounded by a pack of merciless coyotes. And now they were here, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the clinic, hopping for survival. The lead veterinarian, a tall woman with sharp, focused eyes, assessed the older shepherd immediately. "He's been in a fight with multiple predators. We need to sedate him for treatment. There's extensive trauma, possible broken ribs and lacerations. Blood loss is significant." Her voice was calm but urgent, the kind of voice that demanded attention and respect. The man knelt beside Max, trying to calm him. "It's okay, little guy, they're going to take care of him," he whispered. Max pressed close to the older dog, tiny paws brushing against fur that smelled faintly of blood and earth. The puppy's eyes, wide with fear and awe, watched every movement. He had witnessed courage, skill, and sacrifice beyond anything he could comprehend, and now he waited, powerless yet trusting. The older shepherd's amber eyes met the man, for a brief second, filled with unspoken messages. No words could capture the loyalty, the courage, the survival instincts that had carried him through the night. The man nodded, understanding the weight of the gaze. He had never encountered a dog like this, an animal who had fought death itself and still chosen protection over self-preservation. Sedation was administered, and the older shepherd's body went limp, muscles relaxing but the tension never fully leaving his frame. Max let out a soft whine, leaning against the dog instinctively. The man stroked the puppy's head gently, heart heavy with emotion. Outside the sterile walls of the clinic, the night continued, the memory of the pack and the dark field lingering like a shadow. The surgery and treatment began, delicate and precise. Every cut, every stitch, every drop of blood was a battle waged against time and mortality. Max paced nervously, whines growing as he pressed against the man's legs. He had never experienced this before, human intervention, sterile lights, strange smells, but instinct told him that this was necessary. And deep down, he trusted that the older shepherd, even in vulnerability, could survive. Hours passed. Sweat glistened on the man's forehead as he waited in the cold waiting room. Max clutched against him, tiny paws kneading at his shirt. Every sound, a cough, a footstep, a door opening, made his heart leap. Time seemed both infinite and unbearably short. The battle had shifted from the field to the operating room, and the stakes were just as high. Finally, the veterinarian emerged, her expression guarded but not grim. "He's stable for now," she said, voice low. "Extensive injuries, but he's alive. He'll need rest, antibiotics, and monitoring. He's a fighter, survived multiple predator attacks, blood loss, and extreme stress." The man exhaled, relief flooding through him. Max yipped softly, pressing against the older shepherd's limp body on the recovery bed. Slowly, carefully, the shepherd stirred, muscles twitching as consciousness returned. His amber eyes opened slightly, scanning the room, assessing protective even in weakness. Max pressed closer, tiny nose brushing fur, and the older dog allowed it, a soft rumble escaping his throat, a sound of reassurance and connection. The man knelt beside them, voice choked with emotion. "You've done enough. You saved him, you saved my Max." The older shepherd's gaze met his, unblinking, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in terror, trust, and survival. Max whimpered softly, tail twitching, finally able to relax a little as the danger of the night receded. But even as relief filled the room, tension lingered. The field, the pack, the moonlit chaos, it was all still alive in memory. Max's small body shivered, and the man knew the events of the night had changed both dogs forever. They had survived impossible odds, relied on courage, skill, and instinct, and had emerged bonded by a shared struggle that would never be forgotten. The older shepherd lay quietly now, breathing steady but shallow, scars and fresh wounds visible under the clinic lights. Max curled close, pressing his tiny body against his protector, who had carried him through the night. The man stroked both of them gently, tears prickling his eyes. The legend of the dog thought lost, the pup who had almost been lost, and the night of terror they had endured together. The story was still unfolding, and its echoes would resonate far beyond the clinic walls. A faint howl outside reminded them that the wilderness still waited, that danger was never fully gone. But here, in the safety of the clinic, in the warmth of human care and the unspoken bond between two extraordinary dogs, survival had won, at least for now. Max pressed against the older shepherd, tiny body trembling with relief and awe. The older dog shifted slightly, tail flicking, amber eyes scanning the room even in weakness. The man realized that the bond between these two creatures, forged in the crucible of life and death, would endure long after the night had ended. And somewhere deep in the older shepherd's gaze, Max could sense an unspoken promise: "I will always protect you, no matter what." The night was far from over. Recovery, vigilance, and the lingering threat of the wild remained. But in this moment, amidst scars, blood, and exhaustion, the story of courage, trust, and survival had reached a pivotal turning point. And for Max, the older shepherd, and the man who had raced to their side, the memory of this night would burn forever, etched in fur, blood, and the indomitable spirit of survival. The first rays of dawn crept through the clinic windows, casting pale golden light across the recovery room. Max, still small, trembling, and wide-eyed, pressed close to the older shepherd, whose matted fur glistened with antiseptic and sweat. The wounds had been stitched, bandaged, and cleaned, but the battle scars, both old and fresh, remained visible. Every mark told a story of survival, of courage, of a night where instinct and loyalty had triumphed against overwhelming odds. The older shepherd stirred, muscles flexing as consciousness fully returned. His amber eyes flicked toward Max, scanning his tiny companion. Max whimpered softly and nudged the dog's side, tail wagging weakly. The older shepherd responded with a low rumble, a sound that was part acknowledgement, part reassurance, a gentle reminder that he had endured and that Max was safe. The man, exhausted but vigilant, crouched beside them, hands trembling as he stroked their fur. "You did it, you both did it," he whispered. Tears glistened in his eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Max pressed closer, ears twitching, eyes locked on the man, then flicking to the older shepherd. In the dim morning light, he seemed to understand that the night's terror had cemented an unbreakable bond between him and the dog who had become more than a protector. He had become family. The older shepherd's breathing deepened, but his gaze never left Max. The man noticed a subtle shift, a tiny wag of the tail, a soft lick to Max's head, a moment of vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the fierce, almost supernatural courage he had displayed just hours earlier. The puppy's tiny paws pressed against the dog's chest, shivering not from fear now, but from relief and trust. Outside the clinic, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint memories of the moonlit battle, the rustle of grass, the distant howl of coyotes, the tension of the field where life and death had hung in balance. The man knew they had survived by inches, by instinct, and by the unwavering courage of a dog thought lost to the wilderness years ago. Finally, the veterinarian entered, her expression softened with relief. "He's stable. No major internal injuries, just a lot of bruising and the lacerations. With rest, antibiotics, and care, he'll recover fully. But you must keep him calm and close. He's still in shock." The man nodded, kneeling to stroke the older shepherd's fur. "He's more than just a dog, he's a hero." Max whimpered softly, nudging the older dog's side. The shepherd shifted slightly, a low rumble echoing from deep within his chest. He had survived impossible odds, and yet he remained vigilant. The man smiled, placing a reassuring hand over Max's tiny head. "You've got a guardian for life, little buddy. Someone who's never going to let anything happen to you." The day passed slowly, sunlight spilling across the recovery room, highlighting the scratches, scars, and bandages that told the story of the previous night. Max pressed close to the older shepherd, occasionally glancing toward the door, ears flicking at every sound. He had been through terror, darkness, and adrenaline-fueled chaos, and now he had learned the meaning of trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond forged in moments of life-or-death danger. The older shepherd shifted slightly, muscles rippling under the healing bandages. His amber eyes met the man, for a long, unblinking moment, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had all endured together. This was no ordinary dog. He had survived years in the wild, faced predators alone, and then chosen to protect a tiny, helpless puppy when the odds were against him. The man's chest swelled with pride and awe. Later that evening, the man opened the door to the backyard. The older shepherd, though still bandaged and weak, stepped outside with careful precision. Max followed, tiny paws sinking into the grass, ears alert, eyes wide. The night's terror felt like a distant memory, yet its echoes lingered in every cautious glance, every muscle flexed in vigilance. The backyard was quiet, bathed in the golden glow of twilight. The older shepherd lowered his head, sniffing the grass, surveying the perimeter. Max approached cautiously, tail wagging, and pressed close. The shepherd nudged him gently, and Max pressed harder against him, warmth and trust radiating between them. The bond forged in the chaos of moonlight and blood was now unshakable, cemented in experience, fear, and loyalty. Suddenly, a faint rustle at the edge of the yard caught both dogs' attention. Max's tiny body stiffened, ears twitching. The older shepherd's gaze snapped toward the sound, muscles coiling like springs. A single coyote, smaller than the pack from the night before, had wandered near, curious, testing boundaries. Amber eyes met gold, teeth bared, but the older dog remained firm. Low growls vibrated through the air, a warning, a promise. Max pressed close, trembling, yet no longer paralyzed with fear. He had learned from his guardian, learned the power of courage and instinct. The coyote, sensing the unwavering vigilance, hesitated. It sniffed the air, measured the odds, and slowly retreated into the shadows. The field had been tested, trust had survived, and courage had prevailed. The man watched from the porch, heart swelling, realizing that he had witnessed something extraordinary. This wasn't just survival. This was a story of instinct, loyalty, and bravery that transcended the ordinary. Max's tiny yip, the nudges, the trembling paws, and the older shepherd's unwavering vigilance, all of it told a story that words alone could never capture. As night fell fully, stars glittering overhead, Max curled against the older shepherd, his tiny body finally still, shivering only with residual adrenaline. The older dog lowered his head, amber eyes scanning the yard one last time before closing them in brief rest. The man knelt beside them, stroking fur, heart heavy with awe. He realized the truth. Some bonds are forged not by words, but by life and death, fear and courage, trust and protection. The legend of the older shepherd, the K9 thought lost, the protector who defied odds, the hero who saved a tiny puppy from certain death, had come full circle. And Max, the puppy who had faced terror and learned bravery under the watchful eyes of a guardian, now had a hero, a teacher, and a friend for life. The night passed quietly, the danger receded, but the echoes of the moonlit field and the pack of coyotes lingered in memory. The bond forged in blood, fear, and survival remained unbreakable, a testament to courage, loyalty, and the raw, unfiltered power of instinct. In the early morning light, Max's tiny eyes opened. The older shepherd was awake, body healed enough to shift slightly, gaze unwavering. The man watched, tears in his eyes, as the two dogs touched noses, a silent promise exchanged between them: survival, trust, and protection. And somewhere beyond the yard, the faint howl of a distant coyote echoed, a reminder that the wild still waited, that danger was never fully gone. But for Max, the older shepherd, and the man who had raced to their side, the night's trials had forged an unbreakable bond, a story of courage and loyalty that would live forever. The man whispered softly, voice choked with awe and emotion, "You too, you're legends, heroes." Max yipped softly, pressing closer, and the older shepherd's deep rumble vibrated in response. The legend was alive, the bond eternal, and the night of terror had become a story of triumph, bravery, and unshakable love. The camera of memory captured the scene, bloodied, exhausted but alive, small and vulnerable but brave, a bond forged in moonlight, fire, and survival. And as dawn broke fully over the horizon, the world seemed, if only for a moment, to pause and honor the courage of two extraordinary dogs who had faced death and emerged unbroken. The night was over, but their story, legendary, cinematic, unforgettable, would echo forever.